After a 2-year break, Graduated and Grown is back. Hey, you guys. If you are new to the podcast, my name is Ariane, and this is my podcast, Graduated and Grown. I went on a 2-year hiatus, which is so embarrassing, but we're back. We're better than ever. In today's episode, I really want to just reground you guys on the podcast. I hate when I use corporate speech in my day-to-day life. Reground is so annoying, but it is a great word to describe this. So, gonna give you the updated version of Graduated and Grown. I'm gonna give you a little bit of background. I'm gonna tell you what I've been up to for the past 2.5 years, and then share my updated vision for the podcast. So I'm very excited to take you guys along with me on this journey. But before we get into all of that, I wanted to do a few icebreakers. And I have this game. It's one of my favorite games. It's not like Uno or Family Feud. It's this game called We're Not Really Strangers. Essentially, this is like a conversation game. And I don't remember how I learned about this. But basically, on the box, it says, "Come curious, leave connected." And this is a really weird thing that I realized after college. But I realized I was not having as many vulnerable and authentic conversations with my friends as I would have liked to. Like, I realized I don't know this thing about this person. I never asked. I'm sure they would be open to having conversation about it, but that wasn't the focus of our friendship, or that wasn't the focus of me at the time. That wasn't where my mind was at. I wasn't really trying to dig deep with people. And now I'm in this era of life where I really want to know and understand my friends. And at the same time, I want them to know and understand me. So, this game, We're Not Really Strangers, in my personal opinion, is a great opportunity to really get to know your friends. So, for my solo episodes at the moment, we're going to do a few cards so you guys can help to get to know me. And I'm also trying to be a vulnerable, authentic person. So, I'm excited to answer some of these questions. Now, some of them just won't work because it's me talking to you guys and like you can't respond. So we'll see which ones I can actually answer. Ooh, okay. Here's the first one. This is level 1, which is about perception. What are you more afraid of, failure or success, and why? That one's easy for me. I know a lot of people say they're afraid of success. I am not. I am definitely afraid of failure. I would be extremely disappointed if one day I woke up and, let's say it was like 20 years from now, if I woke up one day and I was like, I am not doing anything, I have not achieved anything that I've set out to achieve, I think that would really wreck me. Um, and I actually expect success out of myself. Now, when I say success, I'm not expecting to be the next Taylor Swift or Beyonce, right? Like, yes, that would be ideal. If I could sing, I would totally pursue that. But I have certain things that I know that I can do and that I'm setting out to do. I may not be the most motivated all the time, but I know I'm capable of it. So success is it's in my roadmap. So I'm not afraid of it for sure. How does one earn your vulnerability? Have I earned it? How can I earn it more? Obviously, I can't answer the last two, but how does one earn my vulnerability? I'll admit, since graduating college, I think I am more vulnerable with more people now, but not everyone. And I think I'm selective on who I share my vulnerability with because, one, I know everyone is not my friend. Not to say I have like ops out here that I'm talking to. That's not what I'm saying. But like there are some people that they are my acquaintances and we will have a good time. We will kiki really in groups, but I know that person is not my friend. And therefore, why would I be very vulnerable? I don't know. It's hard because, like I said, in general, I am more vulnerable today than I was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, which is crazy. I started college a little over 8 years ago. But if I had to answer this question, I think your friendship to me automatically earns you some of my vulnerability. I think also you being vulnerable with me makes me want to be vulnerable with you. I think there was a period in time where maybe some people were vulnerable with me and I didn't really share much. I don't know what that was all about, but I now know that like when somebody opens up to me, I want to open up to them. Like, you gave me this gift, you gave me your vulnerability. Here, take mine, and let's be vulnerable besties together. I think there's that. Is there anything else I would add? I think also just showing up for me, whether that's through a heartfelt text or if I'm hosting something, you come and you help, or you just come and you're just a good time. Or if I'm doing a trip, you come on a trip. There's so many different ways that people can show up for me or for someone. But I think when you show up for me, it just shows me, oh, you know what I mean? You're either a friend or you're a friend potential. So there's that. Everyone does not deserve my vulnerability. I'm learning that. And it's not that hard for me, but I do feel like, when we have a connection and when we're friends or when you've shared your vulnerability with me, it is a lot easier for me, to share my vulnerable thoughts with you. Anyway, that is We're Not Really Strangers. We're definitely going to do this again for another solo episode. But the main content of this podcast episode today is going to be a reintroduction to the podcast, right? But before we get into that, I need to tell you why I created Graduated and Grown, give you the history, update you on how my life has been, how I've changed, and then we'll get into the new podcast. But let's rewind a little bit. So back in 2020, I think, or was it early 2021? I can't remember. But I was on my friend Ornella's podcast, which is called Messy and Mindful. Ornella, bring the podcast back. And we did an episode titled Graduated and Grown, and we talked about post-grad life. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it because I'm curious what we were talking about. But I had such a great time chatting with her. And I realized, I actually think I'm passionate about talking about life post-grad. I graduated from college in 2020, so I was a part of the pandemic class. And, not to say that we had it worse than everybody else, but I think it was very interesting where we had these plans and nothing went according to plan. The only thing that went according to plan is that I lived and that I graduated, right? I remember that spring semester, so weeks before the pandemic started, I was looking at apartments and I was very delusional. I didn't understand how much taxes were going to be coming out of my check. I was looking at these expensive $3,500 apartments in downtown Chicago, just very unrealistic. And I was planning my life in Chicago. Justin was also going to be moving probably to the suburbs. And I was like, I'm going to be this corporate girly. I have this job. I'm so excited, blah, 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 blah. None of that went according to plan. Yes, thankfully I kept my job, but I didn't move to Chicago till a year and a half later, right? Oh my gosh, I moved there the day that I'm recording this exactly 2 years ago. That's crazy. Okay, anyway, sorry. Long story short, things didn't go according to plan. And for a little bit more context, I went to college for journalism and marketing. But really the goal was to be a journalist, to be a reporter. I really loved entertainment news. And I was like, I want to be on the Today Show. I feel like on the Today Show, you get a good mix of entertainment, lifestyle, but also a little bit of hard news. And that was the plan. I had it written down on all my goal sheets and I was working towards it. I was very, very involved. And then one day I realized, I don't think this is for me. I love the storytelling aspect of journalism. I love being creative. I love to talk, but I realized I didn't want to be a reporter, at least not a traditional reporter. So I decided to lean more into marketing. I had more internships in marketing, and I felt like you could still get that element of storytelling and being creative. And I still work in marketing today, but there's something missing. I know I love talking to people. I love sharing my thoughts. I love learning and telling other people's stories. And so all of my interests and my experiences, honestly, it made complete sense for me to launch a podcast. I could do all my own graphics. I could do the editing. I know how to do audio stuff. Me saying audio stuff makes it seem like I'm not informed, but I know this stuff. I went to school for this, right? And so that's how the podcast was birthed. When I initially launched this podcast, I was still living at home. I think it was 2021. And this podcast was really aimed to discuss the difficulties of navigating life after college and being a full-time adult. I had so many questions when I realized oh, okay, I wasn't on my own really till I moved out. But there's just so many things about being independent, being an adult, being on your own that people don't teach you. You really just have to go out and learn it. And so I wanted to start this podcast to be a platform where I could share the things that I was struggling with. I could talk with my friends, get their stories, talk to some experts, and really just learn what is life post grad? What the heck are we doing? What are you doing? What are you struggling with? Let's chat about it. And also, an interesting thing about that time of my life is obviously dealing with the complexities of that global pandemic. I was still living at home with my family, which was an adjustment. I had started my very first corporate job remotely, which again wasn't what I planned. And then also just navigating being in long distance relationships platonically and then romantically with Justin. Like that was a big difference. Like going from seeing Justin every day or like having game nights at my friend Maya's house and like being able to drive and visit my friend that lived over here and doing brunch with this friend. Like all my friends live within 10 minutes. Now my friends are all over the country and some I haven't seen in a very long time. That is a lot to deal with when you're used to one thing and then things shift. And then with the pandemic, you weren't really able to go and live normally. So, anyway, all of that is the backstory of the podcast. Like, Graduated and Grown was really this podcast to help me and y'all who were listening at the time just figure out life post grad. So, before I get into the new vision of the podcast, I thought it would be helpful for me to just like tell you what I've been up to for the past 2.5 years. If I had to put it all in like a few words, it would be making excuses, but living life. I am a person that is like perpetually busy. And I'm busy because I make myself busy. Like, I really could live a non busy life if I just didn't do certain things. But I like being busy. And with that, I am balancing a lot. And I just kept pushing out relaunching the podcast. I actually didn't even finish season 3. There were 2 or 3 more episodes that were supposed to come out. 2 of those were guest episodes. The footage didn't upload to the server. Neither did the audio. So I couldn't even do an audio episode. I was really discouraged. I didn't want to go back to the guests and be like, hey, can we redo that podcast we did 3 months ago? I don't have the footage anymore. So I just was really demotivated. And at the same time, I was like, but I love my podcast. Like, this has been such a great platform. I have connected with new people from here. I've actually made friends with some of my guests that have been on here. And I knew I wanted to bring it back. And I know we all feel this way, but like when you do something, you feel like it really fills like a hole in the industry or whatever that you're working on. And don't get me wrong, I feel like there's a lot of adulting podcasts or podcasts about life in your 20s, but I genuinely felt like this podcast was different. One, I'm the only host. I feel like a lot of these other podcasts have like friends that are on, which I love. I listen to a few of them, right? 2, my podcast isn't that serious. Sometimes it's a little serious, but we still have fun over here, right? Like if we're going to talk about something like, I don't even know, taxes, we're going to do it in a fun way, right? 3, I'm not an influencer, right? So I'm living, a pretty normal life of a 20 something, right? I feel like I'm able to relate to a lot of the struggles. I'm not making $650,000 from being on the internet. Now, if that happens, I will be very happy, very, very happy. And I will spread that wealth with those that I love. And then also, I felt like, again, I do listen to a few like adulting podcasts, but I feel like the topics that I want and wanted to hear about like life in your 20s weren't being discussed as much as I hoped. Or maybe they weren't being discussed from this perspective or this angle that I really wanted to hear. And so, with all of that just going through my mind over the past 2.5 years, I was like, it's time to bring the podcast back, but this time with a little bit more life under my belt. With this refreshed podcast, I'm really excited to share my learnings, to go back to having conversations with interesting guests, and to continue unraveling the complexities of being in your 20s, but also talk about the beauty of being in your 20s like this. And when I say your 20s, I think a lot of this also goes for your 30s as well. But like, there are so many cool things about being in your 20s, right? For a lot of people, when you turn 21, it's like, woohoo, I can do XYZ, I'm legal. I feel like as you grow, there's more things that are unlocked, there's more experiences. I feel like as we get older, our friends' experiences start changing. Our friends are having babies, our friends are getting married, our friends are doing this cool thing at work, doing this cool thing at school. Friends are graduating from medical school. Like so much happens as we get older. And as a result of that, people are changing, things are changing. So this podcast, obviously, we're still going to talk about life post grad. But now that I'm in like this, new era of life in the sense of like I've been out of college for 4 years, which is absolutely crazy. There's a few more things that I've learned and I have other questions. You know what I mean? So I'm excited to dive into all of that with you guys in this podcast. But I also wanted to tell you guys like what has changed in my life. So when I first started this podcast, I was in my very first role. I was working in financial services and I was in a rotational program and I was in a pretty like creative role. I liked the team. I liked the job. And then a few months later, I transitioned into my second rotation, which was more of like a campaign manager position. And that really had me interested in like working on marketing campaigns, because I didn't really work on marketing campaigns in my first role. And then after that, guys, I got a new job. So, fun fact, actually, really, really sad fact. I actually recorded an episode when I was contemplating quitting my job at Discover. I guess I can say that now. Like, I was working at Discover, but I never edited it. I probably still have the footage. But that was a really big decision in my life. And maybe I'll do an episode about like quitting your first job and pursuing something new. It can be really scary. I had a lot of anxiety around that, but that was a really big thing for me. So now I work in beauty. Totally, totally different, right? Another big thing is, y'all, I don't live in Chicago anymore. I moved to Florida. I've been here for almost a year. It'll be a year in, I think, 3 weeks. Crazy. Like, I'm a Floridian. Well, I don't want to say I'm a Floridian. I don't want to give myself that title because I don't really think I identify with this state. But that was a really big thing. I guess also, since launching the podcast, I guess you guys would know this, Justin moved to Florida. So he moved here, I think 2021. But Justin lives down here. I also live down here. And Justin and I are now engaged. So that happened this summer. So now I am preparing to be in my wifey era, which is so crazy, like undiscovered territory right now. So that has been a really big thing. Another thing, which is very positive, is I'm not as bad as I once was when it came to making decisions. I started therapy maybe 2022 and was in it for about, oh my gosh, yeah, 2 years. Wait, 2 years? I did not realize we talked that long. Wow. I am not in therapy as of today because I just came to the decision that I wanted to probably speak to someone else. So I'll talk about that one day in the future. But I do feel like my relationship with my therapist and the conversations that we had really helped me, one, make decisions, and also two, figure out how I feel about certain things. And three, she, like one of our last conversations, she really affirmed me. And she was like, Ariane, do you think you make bad decisions? I was like, no. And she was like, think about the decisions that you've made. Have you made something where you're like, oh, that was a terrible decision? I was like, no. And we just had this whole blown up conversation where I realized I wasn't giving myself enough credit for the decisions that I have made. Now, yes, I'm not the person that can look at one apartment and be like, oh, yep, that's the apartment for me. No, I have to tour 15. That's just who I am as a person. But once I feel strongly about something, I can move forward confidently. And I don't think that was me a few years ago. If you want to cringe, you can go listen to that episode I recorded about my decision making abilities. It wasn't, I just, it makes me a little sad that I was a little frazzled back then, but it's okay. So, yeah, those are just some highlights of what's changed. I feel like also, like I mentioned, I feel like I'm a more vulnerable and authentic person. Not to say I was ever putting up a front, but like I really want to get to know people and I really want people to get to know me. And I also value, well, I was going to say I value friendships more. That's not true. I've always valued friendships. Friendships are so freaking important to me. Friendships can cause me so much happiness, but when things aren't going well, they cause me so much sadness. Like, whew, we'll get into that actually very, very, very soon. But I really cherish my friendships so much. I am really trying to invest in them and invest in the people that I really, really love. So that has also changed. But before I end this podcast, I wanted to give you guys an update on like what you should expect in this new chapter of Graduated and Grown, right? Like I'm no longer freshly out of college. So I really think you should expect new thoughts, new ideas, and new experiences. Like I said, I've grown so much since those first 3 seasons. I think you should expect new guests, new topics from a more seasoned point of view. And if you know me in real life, you know I don't have the answers, but we're going to work on those answers together. We're going to get our perspectives right and we're going to make informed decisions. And then also, like, we're going to chat through topics that are relevant to anyone in their 20s or 30s. Fun topics, serious topics, just all the things that comes along with navigating life. And I realized your 20s aren't strictly for figuring out your life. You have your 20s, right? But you also have the rest of your life to get life's answers. So there really shouldn't be that much pressure on us to have every single aspect of our life figured out. you have time. So, y'all, I hope that this episode really served as a refresher into who I am, what the podcast is about, and I'm really, really excited. Stay tuned for next week's episode. I'm recording with my friend Camille, and we're going to get into the quarter life crisis. That is going to be great. And then I'm giving y'all like some tea, because really I shouldn't even say it up front, but I'm going to, because if you're still listening at this point, you're a real one. We'll be doing some series on the Graduated and Grown podcast. And the first series is going to be about a topic that I talked about today, friendships. In my personal life, have experienced not necessarily a lot, but I have a lot of thoughts when it comes to friendships. I still need help when it comes to friendships. So I'm really excited to have conversations with some people and then also share my thoughts and my learnings, because I've learned a lot about friendships since the beginning of this podcast. But really excited to dive into so many different questions and aspects of friendship. So stay tuned for that. I'm so excited. And we're also going to get ourselves prepped and ready for 2025, because it is right around the corner. Anyway, y'all, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode, the first episode of season 4 of Graduated and Grown. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe, follow this podcast, whatever that little button says, and also leave us a review. Whenever I say us, it's me and the podcast. Like, we're two different entities, but we're one at the same time. Leave us a review on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. That really helps these platforms know that people are listening and they're engaged. If you have any ideas for episodes, if you want to be a guest, feel free to DM me, preferably on the podcast Instagram at Graduated and Grown. By the way, follow Graduated and Grown on all social media platforms. We have YouTube, which is where the video podcast with the guests will be. We're on Instagram and we're on TikTok at Graduated and Grown on all those platforms. But if you have any ideas, suggestions, go ahead and DM those platforms. And I also have a guest form, but you can DM me first and we can chit chat about it before you fill out the form. But I will also have content every week on those platforms. But I really, really appreciate y'all. I'm excited to have the podcast back. It's like Graduated and Grown. She's a little more mature now. You know, she's even more grown than she was before, but she's still trying to figure out life. Anyway, I will see y'all next week. Have a great rest of your week and we'll chat soon. Bye.